Unfortunately for Oregon Duck fans, I was absolutely right. Hello, everyone. Welcome into another episode of the Soder Report. My name is Kyle Soder. I hope that those of you watching are taking this loss a little bit better than I am. Now, I'm gonna take the saddest victory lap that you'll ever hear in your life. I'm gonna get into the game, especially the coaching, and you know me, I'm all about the bigger picture. I want to go into the expectations. That's what my entire show pretty much on the Penn State victory was what does this mean for expectations? I'm not going to focus as much on that in this video because I think that the coaching needs to be talked about. But first, I want to talk about some of the stuff that I was saying leading up to this game that was not super popular. So the first thing I'll get into is Indiana, who Indiana is as a program. And it's kind of funny. I think us Oregon Duck fans have a different perception of the Indiana Hoosiers than the Big Ten Blue Bloods, the classic Big Ten teams like Michigan and Ohio State, teams that have been in the Big Ten forever. They probably look at Indiana the way that we look at Northwestern. But in the 2 years Oregon has been in the Big Ten, Indiana has been a really good team. They're probably going to be a playoff team at the end of the year. They're 6-0. They're going to be a top 5 team tomorrow. So I think that our view of Indiana is different from the rest of the Big Ten. And I think I was even more optimistic on the Indiana Hoosiers than most other people. I think most other people, this goes for the big podcast, this goes for the analysts on ESPN, on CBS, on Fox. This goes for the content creators like me. All of those guys, I don't want to say all of them, but most of them, the ones that I was listening to, seem to think that Indiana is sort of the same team from last year. The team that will beat Michigan State 56-0. The team that will beat up on FCS opponents. And then once they meet a top 5 team, they'll get run over. And going into this matchup, I'm on record saying that this was going to be tougher than most people think. I'm even on record saying that this game was going to be tougher than the Penn State game, even though it was at home. Because I think that Indiana team has a different mentality. I thought that, and I was obviously proven right in this game. They're way more physical than Penn State. They're more physical than Oregon. We saw that today. And I didn't think that enough people were giving Indiana credit. And I didn't predict an Indiana win, but I gave Indiana more credit than most other people did outside of the Indiana Hoosiers content creator circle. So that was something that I sort of saw coming, was this was going to be a really difficult, muddy game. The second thing I saw after the Penn State game. I said this, I went into this in detail on my last podcast, was I'm on record in my last podcast saying that I was confused about the Dante Moore Heisman campaign coming out of that Penn State game. Because when you watch that game, Oregon put up 3 points in the first half. And in the second half, they scored 2 touchdowns. And then he made a throw in overtime to win the game. But when I was watching that game, when I went back and watched it, it was pretty obvious to me that was... I mean, how do I want to say this? That game was won in the trenches. That game was won because the offensive line was better than their defensive line. It was won because the Oregon defensive line was better than Penn State's offensive line. It wasn't because Dante Moore put on a Superman cape and dragged the Oregon Ducks to victory. And to me, that's what a Heisman quarterback can do. So I was confused about that coming out of that game. And in this game, Dante Moore had a chance, down by a touchdown, to have his Heisman moment. Because the team looked unmotivated. The team wasn't physical. They didn't look like they wanted to win as bad as Indiana did. And Dante Moore could have had his Heisman moment, down 20-27 in the fourth quarter. He could have dragged the Oregon Ducks, kicking and screaming, to victory. But that's not what he did. I am on record saying that's I don't think that's who he is. And right now, anyway, I think he can become that, but he needs to develop more. And yeah, the Dante Moore Heisman campaign is right where I think it should be, and that is off the rails. Off the tracks, anyway. Off the tracks, we can say that. So that's the second thing that, unfortunately for all of us, I was right about. Well, let's get into the coaching now, because to me that's the main thing. Before we get into the coaching, though, I forgot to shout out our sponsor, Elite Cacao Supplements. Head on over to elitecacao.com to get your cacao-based supplements. They'll help with memory retention. They'll help with cognitive ability. They'll help with mood boosting, which I'm sure we all need right now, especially me. I could use anything for a mood boost. Doesn't matter how strong at this point. But head on over to elitecacao.com for a healthy way to boost your mood. All right, so the coaching. I want to make this the main focus of this show, because it's too often after a loss in a big game in the Dan Lanning era where I come away from it saying that if they had just had a better game plan, if they had just been coached better, they probably win that game. Or something to that effect. Today they were thoroughly outcoached by Kurt Cignetti and his staff. In the Rose Bowl, do I even need to mention it? Do I even need to say it? We all know that Dan Lanning got taken to the cleaners. Lanning, Stein, and Lupoy. got their clocks cleaned by Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, and Jim Knowles in the Rose Bowl. They were outcoached by Kalen DeBoer. They had the better team back in 2023. They had the better team in both of those games, and they went 0-2 against Washington. Outcoached. And then in 2022, what can you really say about that one? Whittington slipped. They had the better team. It shouldn't have come down to it, but Whittington slipped. I'll concede that. There was a tweet last year that I've been thinking a lot about recently. The tweet said that Ryan Day is the Michael Jordan of James Franklin's. A lot of you may have seen that tweet, laughed at it, thought it was hilarious. Because at that time, he had just lost to the Oregon Ducks at Autzen Stadium. And, well, Ryan Day goes on to win a national championship, so no one's laughing at him now. He's up there now with the best in the business. He's right up there with Kirby Smart for one of the best coaches in college football. If Dan Lanning is an early round exit in the college football playoff this year, and if James Franklin sticks around too, there's a real possibility he's gone. We'll talk about that because Penn State isn't doing any favors for the resume. But if Dan Lanning's another early round exit, he's sort of going to start being looked like the Michael Jordan of James Franklin's. And for those of you who didn't see that tweet, that means that James Franklin notoriously can't win a big game. But he will win the ones that he's supposed to. So the point of that tweet was Ryan Day wins slightly bigger games than James Franklin, and he dominates James Franklin. Dan Lanning so far has won slightly bigger games than James Franklin, and has dominated James Franklin. Now he's taken this program forward a step. They've gone from playoff contender to national championship contender. But the results haven't shown that. Anyway, let's get into the coaching. Usually an offensive coordinator will script plays to open the game. I assume that Will Stein does this. He'll have an idea of what the first play he's going to run is days before the game. For those of you who don't remember what the first play of this game was, let me remind you. And if you know it but you don't want to hear it, then earmuffs me here. Dante Moore gets sacked on the first play of the game. Play action fake. Nothing is open downfield. He gets sacked for the first of 6 times. I'm not going to talk a lot about Lupoy because I thought the defense played fine. I mean, they had a pick 6. I thought the defense played good enough to win. The offense put them in awful positions. Failing a 4th and 1 from the 46. Indiana gets their first drive in Oregon territory. That's an awful position to put your defense in. They held them to 3 anyway. So the defense played fine. The defense accounted for 7 of your 20 points. The offense is the one that put up 13. So I'm not going to talk about Lupoy. I think he did fine. But Will Stein, dude, when you first got to Oregon to replace Kenny Dillingham, your famous line was "Feed the studs." You said that over and over, and it gets talked about quite a bit on more shows than just mine. Listen into Locked On Ducks. Every time that Will Stein is brought up, the host of Locked On Ducks will bring up how Will Stein's philosophy is feed the studs. That's what we talk about when Will Stein gets brought up, is he finds ways to get his best players the ball. Anyone want to guess how many catches Kenyon Sadiq had? Any guesses? Let's see. I remember one. I remember one catch in this game. Okay, he had two. Two catches for 21 yards in this game. It's just unacceptable. How do you not have plays drawn up? How is your first play? I'm a 49ers fan, and it's well documented Kyle Shanahan scripts the first 15 plays of a game. I don't know how many Will Stein has scripted going into the game, but how do your first 5 not have Kenyon Sadiq heavily involved? How are 2 of your first 5 plays not designed specifically to get Kenyon Sadiq and Decorian Moore the football? It's unacceptable. You can't play games like that. Of course you're going to lose if he's not getting the ball. Speaking of Decorian Moore, who had 7 receptions on 10 targets for 89 yards against Penn State, he had 4 receptions for 39 in this game. 1 carry for 7. It's not good enough. It's stupid play calling. It's dumb. I'm sorry. I'd like to put it more politically correct than that, in better terms than that, but there's no other reason to describe it. It's stupid. So, you didn't get your best players the ball. Well, I hope your running game was going really well. Oh, it was. You had 3 guys, 3 of your running backs, running for over 5 yards per carry. Surely you did well on third down, right? Wrong. You had 3 running backs going for over 5 yards per carry. And your third down percentage was putrid. Third down conversion percentage was putrid. I want to say, let me just bring it up. Let me bring it up. Three of 14 on third down. So it was bad. It was bad. Most of those were, to make it even worse, most of those third down attempts were from 9, 10, 11 yards away. And you had running backs carrying the ball for 5 yards per carry. So I really don't understand. I don't understand why De'Aaron Hill wasn't featured more. I don't understand why the studs weren't fed, as Will Stein likes to say. I don't understand why, since the run was working, they couldn't they couldn't make it work. I don't get it. It was just a terrible performance, which leads me to Dan Lanning. Dan the man. You were out on college game day early in the morning, taking your shirt off, and now you just look like a fool. Sorry, but you do. You got how do I want to say this? Kurt Signetti had his team ready to go, and you didn't, Dan. And this is starting to get old. We've done this, like I said, this is the fourth time in big games that we're talking about the coaching. We're talking about, hey, if the game plan were better, if the game plan were better, if the team were motivated better, then they probably win this game. If the team just plays their brand of football, if the team just runs their own race, how about that? If the team just ran their own race, then they win the game. That was Dan's messaging going into the game. And the examples he used, which I thought were poor examples, was forgive me for not remembering the names off the top of my head, but there was a horse race and some horse won by 32 laps, I think they said on the broadcast. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's good messaging for an FCS opponent coming to town. Do you think that did Dan Lanning think that this was going to be like Indiana versus Illinois? I think that's poor messaging. Against Penn State, the messaging was 1,000 cuts. The messaging was you needed to play for 60 minutes. That was great. That was the perfect message to send. But to tell your team to run their own race because if you're up by 32 laps, then you should still be going your hardest. You should be running your own race. I think that's a mistake. I think Dan Lanning underestimated Indiana. Indiana was more physical than Oregon. Kurt Signetti was yelling at his players for being injured. Kurt Signetti was up in the faces of referees, getting sideline warnings. He's fiery, he's passionate, and Dan is too. But Kurt had his guys ready to play, and Dan didn't. Dan had his guys ready to Dan had his guys prepared to blow out Indiana when he should have had them ready to kill him with 1,000 cuts, like in the Penn State game. So, this is getting old. Kirby Smart, it took him 5 years at Georgia to win a national championship. But to see your team get outcoached this often it's discouraging. 3 times against Washington. None of those teams were as good as Lanning's Ducks. Last year, you could say that Ohio State was a better team, and Dan's coaching staff outdid Ryan Day's, but they came back in the Rose Bowl and killed you. And then today, Kurt Signetti outcoached you. So, it's getting discouraging at this point. It's not time for a change the way it is in Happy Valley or Sad Valley right now with Penn State. But it's starting to become a discouraging trend. And trends can be reversed, especially in small sample sizes like 5 games. Maybe we're talking about more games than that. We're probably talking about 8 games or so of big games with playoff implications on the line. And you've lost 5 of those. So it's starting to get concerning. Hopefully Dan can turn it around. Yeah. So with the coaching, it's something to monitor. I was super tough on Tosh Lupoy last year. He's done perfectly fine in the Penn State game and in this one. I think the defense was fine. But the overall team and the offense, that was bad. That was really bad. Okay. Oh, let's get into Penn State a little bit, because those have implications for Oregon. If you would have told me 7 weeks ago that Oregon would be 5-1 with a win over Penn State and a loss to a number 7 Indiana, I would have taken that, to be completely honest, because Penn State at the time was looked at as the number 2 team in the nation. So you get a win over the number 2 team in the nation. You drop one after a bye week to the number 7 team. Whatever, your resume still looks perfectly fine. You could go 5-1 and still make the playoff. With the unbelievable decline of the Penn State Nittany Lions, the win over them doesn't look impressive anymore. And I personally, I think that going into that game, Penn State wasn't a number 2 team in the nation, but I do believe that they were a top 10 team in that matchup. The first 3 games they sort of struggled. And the AP voters gave them the benefit of the doubt. I think that was fair. But I still think, I don't think that they were the second best team. I still think they were one of the 10 best in that matchup. And Oregon went in there and dominated them. Their offensive line beat their defensive line. Their wide receivers beat their secondary. Oregon's secondary beat their wide receivers. Oregon's defensive line beat their offensive line. It was a total, complete team win. The title of my last podcast was Oregon Ducks Dominate in Happy Valley, and that's exactly what they did. They dominated that game. They didn't need Dante Moore to be Superman, and that's how they won. That Penn State team has went on to lose to UCLA and Northwestern, and Penn State fans are calling for James Franklin's head. Penn State is now well out of the top 25. They were out of the top 25 after losing to UCLA. Today, losing to Northwestern, they're not going to be ranked for a while if they get it together. They've embarrassed themselves. And for Oregon, that win on your resume is becoming less impressive as they go down the tank. That win for Oregon is looking... It's not looking like one you can really highlight on a resume. And your schedule for the rest of the year, there's not a whole lot on there. Maybe USC can get into the top 25. Maybe Washington can get into the top 25. But there's no more super impressive wins to be had on the schedule. So 11-1 will absolutely still get them in to the playoff. 10-2 probably will. But you'd be the team that everyone's looking at and making fun of, saying, "Where's your quality win?" And Penn State won't be an answer for that question, to be completely honest. So I predicted in the last episode that they would drop one the rest of the way. I predicted they would beat Indiana. I look at this team and I still see a very young team. They're halfway through the year. Maybe they do finish 6-0. But I could easily see a loss on the schedule. I mean, we've seen teams go across country and lose to UCLA. They've had 2 top 10 matchups in a row, and they're going to Rutgers next on the road. They're going to go to Koenig Stadium in Iowa. That's a tough place to play. They're going to go to Washington in a rivalry game. Things get weird in rivalry games. Ask Ohio State. USC looks like a tough game. Looks like it's going to be a tough game. That's a good team. They're going to have to bring it every week, and they can't have look ahead. And they can't have coaching like today. So, as for my expectations for this team, in the preseason, I thought this was a team that would make the playoff and be an early exit. I didn't think they were true contenders. After the Penn State game, I sort of reluctantly put them in the contenders. After this game, I still think that they are there. I am reluctantly putting them in the contenders. Whatever that means. I still think that they are capable of beating the best team in the nation, whoever that is. I still think they're capable of building to that. I don't think it's likely. And if I were a betting man, I wouldn't bet on it. I think that their playoff chances are a lot better if they get to the Big Ten championship game and lose, get home field advantage, and then play one of the 4 teams that haven't played football in 3 weeks. I still think their playoff hopes are better that way. Their playoff hopes might even be better if they don't make the Big Ten championship at all. That might be a better playoff scenario than they had last year. A lot of things would be a better playoff scenario than they had last year. So that's not saying much. This team is not going to win the Big Ten this year. And they're contenders, but they're not. How do I even say this? They're contenders, but they're not the most serious contenders. They're not up there with Ohio State. They're not up there with Miami. Those are the serious contenders right now. And Oregon isn't one. So maybe they'll pull off a miracle. I hope they do, because I get reminded every day that the O on the helmet stands for how many national championships they have. Notice The helmet's missing. It's in storage, as are my Oregon uniforms. Oregon jerseys. Until they don't embarrass me. So, I guess that's it. It's sort of gloomy. It's an instant reaction to an awful loss. You had Indiana at home. You were 7.5 point favorites. Your coach was so confident he was taking his shirt off on college game day and saying that Oregon should run their own race and lap Indiana by 32. So that stuff's embarrassing. I still think Dan Lanning's a good coach. I still think Will Stein's a good offensive coordinator. I still think Tosh Lupoy's a good coordinator. I want to see this team win a national championship. And Phil Knight does too. And he's getting old. There's going to be some urgency. How old is Phil? They better bring out the Phil Knight uniforms again. The shoe duck again. He's 87. Yeah, if they lose another game, they got to bring out shoe duck again and convince Phil to let him stick around. Because at 87 years old, he doesn't have a lot of time left, and it's pretty well documented that he wants to see a national championship. We all do. I don't have a lot more to say. So, hope your week gets better, everyone. There's a lot to look forward to still. This Oregon team still has everything in front of them. And 2026 was always going to be better than 2025, in my opinion. But 2025 has had flashes of looking like it could be an incredible year. So hopefully they can rebound. Hopefully there's no Penn State or Texas Longhorn stuff going on here. Hopefully they can just get back next week and take care of business against Rutgers. Anyway, that's going to be all from here. This has been the Soda Report. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you have a very nice day.